So this was an insane chapter and probably one of my favorite backstories for any character since Kojiro or Raiden. There's just so much to unpack here, so yeah, let's just get into it. So the chapter starts off with Zero getting in battle mode. We see him just contorting his body, getting ready to just rip Buddha apart with his like divine axe thing. It looks pretty insane, and a lot of key phrases are being tossed around here as well that I think shed some light on who Zero is here in present tense. I'm specifically referring to Ares, who calls him sinister, saying that he's never seen a god this evil. To which Hermes says something really interesting to him when he mentions that this is a fateful matchup. And I want to point out, we at this point don't know exactly what Hermes could be referring to here unless we consider that maybe Hermes knew all along about Buddha and Zero's first meeting, that they had way back when. Which begs the question, well, how would Hermes know this? And why would he? Because I think him calling this a fateful encounter is pretty interesting if we ever expected that Zero would ironically one day be the one to deliver punishment on Buddha, right? But again, the only reason we know that's so ironic and fateful is because of the entire backstory that we learn at the end of the chapter. So again, how would Hermes know anything about that? Maybe I'm reading too much into it, but I thought it curious enough to mention here in case anyone else thought it was kind of sus. This could just be common knowledge to everyone in Valhalla, but if it isn't, then I do think it just adds more mystery to what Hermes knows, because it doesn't look like the gods were aware of what Zero even looked like. So it's pretty interesting stuff going on with Hermes. And so then we see Heimdall get a notification, I guess, from the higher ups here on his mobile phone, and he's apparently really tense, I think, from the tension Zero's giving off and the whole traitor turn Buddha took here. And then we see Brunhild and Gol and their side of the explanation to the whole seven gods of fortune and Zero. So it looks like the whole seven gods of fortune were really just a temporary form that Zero took on, meaning I guess it's incorrect to look at it as seven gods into one being, but I mean, honestly, from my interpretation, the seven gods of fortune are the heavenly executioners regardless of the whole Zero plot. So I still want to give their credit as seven individual gods, because you would have to be, I guess, especially chosen to take on the role of the heavenly executioners. So I guess depending on the angle you take, I'd say both interpretations are right here. And then we get into the whole Zero backstory, which does an amazing job at covering pretty much everything we need to know about the current Zero and the Zero from ancient Asia. So it starts off with Zero taking form in the human world for the first time, since at this point in human history we're told it was commonplace for gods and humans to coexist on Earth. And I want to say that I think Zero is specifically taking on a bodily form here, meaning he's taking on a form where even if he's a god, he is still affected by even the pain of falling down from a tree, like we saw when he fell down after helping out that bird. And I'd say my reasoning for believing that is because this is all taking place on Earth, and like we learned already, no human weapons can harm the body of gods in the heavens. So I think it's fair to assume if you're in bodily form on Earth and you're a god, then you won't die out like a typical human, but would still be susceptible to I guess earthly pain and maybe a lot more. Whether or not you agree with me on that is fine, but I do want to revisit this point later on. So then we see him visit a village that pretty much just looks like the slums, and then we see Zero confused as to how he can help them as a god, which I think is at the crux of this entire backstory. And as far as the story tells, this is his first encounter with mankind, and as a god, I think he viewed them probably the same way as he did with the bird and her chick, where he had no preconception of how humanity deals with hardship and thought he could solve it as easily as, just carrying a bird back to its nest. Especially considering that Zero's personality is very naive and childlike on top of having no experience in human hardship. This made complete sense when he saw how problems could be solved so easily for other people if you solve it for them. And in terms of results, he saw how right he was when he noticed how the villagers reacted with instant relief. And then after years and months of him just absorbing their sorrow and pain, from mental to physical to emotional anguish, he looks just absolutely beaten by the end of it. And again, like I said earlier, I think it's because he's taking on a bodily form here that he's suffering as much as he is. He's absorbing all this pain and agony, but I think the only reason it hasn't killed him is because he's a god. I would imagine if you threw all this collective suffering onto just, any ordinary human being, it would drive them psychotic, or even worse considering all this pain is from mankind to begin with. So I think because Zero is still a god, he never went completely mad by the suffering alone, because it's only until he revisits the village when he starts to doubt his ideals. Even when we see him get shoved by that kid he saved years ago, he doesn't react with any anger. He actually and honestly is happy to see him and hopes he's still just as happy as he was when he saved him from, that chest pain that he had. But this is where Zero finds out that happiness alone wasn't what they needed, and that his ideals somewhere along the way did fail. And what I love about this scene especially here is that even though the villagers look happy, with all their women, their jewelry and alcohol and this and that, Zero knows that they are truly not happy when he says that to Buddha. And I love that the story doesn't even mention or explain how Zero came to this conclusion, because it's extremely metaphorical. neutral. If anything, I would say that the villagers looked more spoiled than they were happy. Spoiled by women, spoiled by luxury, spoiled by status, spoiled by all this pleasure, and you could see it on their faces when you compare them to the people who follow Buddha. And it's so interesting that Zero, even after realizing this, is asking without any anger towards any of the villagers, why couldn't he make them happy? And him asking this is entirely justified because he spent years working with this method, just taking in misfortune and believing that was the right way to do it, only to find out it didn't work. And this goes back to his naivety and childlike personality, where he thought the immediate result of instant relief was all happiness is. And we even see him almost transform in the village. I think it looks like his hair suddenly went black for a moment, and that we were going to see him go full demon mode here when he was on the floor, but then we see a massive crowd walk through the village that's actually being led by Buddha. And this is where it gets really tragic, when Zero notices the villagers change their faces when they notice how ragged but happy they look following Buddha regardless. And suddenly we see the villagers look almost shameful when they stop their drinking and they're fighting, and the women are putting back their clothes on, and Buddha isn't even doing anything except just casually walking through here. And again, this is all going back to what I was saying, to where the story is metaphorically telling us the villagers were more spoiled than happy with themselves. And Zero realized this because immediately after seeing the change in their behavior and noticing Buddha's followers and how happy they are, Zero then shouts out to Buddha. And I really like that Buddha doesn't fully explain the difference between his methods and Zero's. He tries to explain it with a quote from his teachings, but ultimately Buddha never gave his people happiness. He simply guided them to their own salvation, and I think that as a parallel is insane here, because Buddha's whole reason for betraying the gods is to save humanity. And the reason Zero doesn't understand this is because he thought happiness was salvation, while Buddha considered them separate and distinct from one another. In Buddha's case specifically, salvation is enlightenment and went beyond Zero's ideals of happiness. And this is just really emotional when we see the people who Zero thought he saved all of a sudden convert to Buddhists when they're suddenly now following him. And we even see a yin and yang visual here that looks kind of ominous in my opinion, because you have Zero in the white and Buddha in the black surrounded by his disciples. And then after this, Zero just storms out, leaving Buddha confused, and now for the first time in his life, Zero's experiencing his own suffering on top of all that collective anguish he absorbed for all that time. Overall, he understands all the effort he gave to his cause, but felt jealous of Buddha when he concluded there was actually a superior method all along. And then this is where we see him finally change into his current transformation, where he looks like a demon, and I think it's fair to assume this is only the result of Zero trying to find his own relief after bearing all that pain from others on top of his own anguish. Because even after, when he's about to attack those people in the woods, he still had the resolve to stop, and not because he hated humanity, but because he knew it was wrong of him to do so. And so my guess is, I think Zero transforming from the tragic hero into his full-blown demon-like appearance only happened because I guess it was the only way he knew how in order to let go of all that suffering. Because when he's in this form, he isn't all dirtied or bruised up like he was before. All that is all gone. So I think, considering how naive and childlike Zero is, you can say he just let that pain and suffering consume him just to find this closure. Of course, he realized how wrong that was of him, which is why he didn't fully commit to killing that lady with her baby. So there's still a significant amount of innocence left to him, which is why he ends up just splitting and becoming the 7 gods of fortune. Also, an interesting thing to point out, the 7 beads in his hair are apparently branded by the 7 deadly sins. So could this be implying that the 7 gods of fortune represent the polar opposite to that? Well, whatever the case may be, when we see them make their appearance, they say something really interesting when we see them discuss among themselves how dangerous things would have gotten had Zero decided to go on his rampage. It's Hotai specifically who said that he was unhinged, so I guess that means Hotai, like most likely all 7 gods of fortune, are different parts of Zero's personality. Given this is our first time seeing Hotai, and he just outright admits his anger here. And then we see Fukuro and Juro talking about Buddha, saying how wrong it is for a human to lead humanity instead of the gods, and I guess this would explain why Ebisu told Buddha he was waiting for the day to deliver judgment on him way back when Shiva versus Raiden first started, because it was always a problem to them that a human was leading the people rather than the gods. And then when Daikoku says that they should deliver divine punishment on him, we suddenly see Bisha interject when he says now isn't the time. So from this point onward, I guess is when the 7 gods of fortune came to be and everyone forgot about Zero eventually. And I think one of the biggest questions I have now is why Bisha decided to wait so long to deliver punishment here. Because he tells the other 6 that they would wait until the time is ripe. So it makes me wonder now when they were actually going to do this, given that they always had a reason to do it anyway, so why the wait? And it's not like they could have predicted Ragnarok would ever happen either, so unless there was a set time and place for Buddha's execution to happen, I don't know why why they didn't just handle their business already. This brings me back a bit to when we saw Jack in the infirmary and we see Abisu about to scrap with him before Bisha says he wouldn't tolerate any wanton killing, so there is a sense of justice we know he carries with himself. And it makes me wonder when I look at the 7 beads in Zero's hair if they represent all 7 gods of fortune, suggesting Bisha is probably the most central and important one if he's the leader, but if he's also a sin as well. And so after this backstory, we're back in present time, and I think it's made clear now that the reason Zero is handling this round is simply for execution. Now I know some of you probably just want to boil it down to his jealousy, but I think it's clear that there is a proper way to ascend to godhood like we saw with Heracles, meaning that at least according to Zero, Buddha violated this when he decided to lead humanity when he was still only human. Of course, this all did start with Zero being jealous and disappointed in himself, but the role of the heavenly executioners does still sit with the 7 gods of fortune, so the fact still remains here that regardless of how this turns out, I don't think there's anything Buddha can say or do to convince Zero that he doesn't deserve that if they feel he did violate this. But then we finally get to the action when Buddha just throws a body kick, sending Zero back flying, and it turns out Buddha has no idea who Zero is, so the next chapter it looks like we're finally going to be getting into some action, it seems. Alright guys, so I'm going to leave it there. Let me know how you guys feel about the chapter. Personally, this was just so amazingly well done in my opinion, and it makes me just want Zero to win even more now. He reminds me a lot of Shiro from Fate Stay Night with the betrayed by your own ideals concept going on, but yeah, what an amazing chapter guys. Let me know how you all feel about it, and if you liked the video, please leave a like, I'd greatly appreciate it. And let me know if you agreed or if you disagreed, and if you're interested in more Record of Ragnarok content, please subscribe if you're down, I'll be doing more. And yeah, thank you so much for watching guys, have a great day.